Did Russian bots hack The Last Jedi and add to all of the vitriol online regarding that movie? Well, there's a new paper making the rounds and blowing up social media. We've got to break it all down. This is the Nerdy News Rundown. Let's get you filled in. Now, before we get into all the craziness, I want to shout out Daniel Skarsgård, who got the nerd card question correct in the video from yesterday about Mysterio. Shout out to you, Daniel, and we're going to do another nerd card question at the end of this video. You're going to need a lot of coffee to get through this story. Now, guys, this is a doozy of a story. It's actually my second time recording this. I got way too ranty the first time. I'm going to try to just hit it point by point and go through it, but I do expect this to be a longer video. Buckle up. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, last night, a PhD from the University of Southern California, Morton Bay, had a paper of his circulating out online talking about the toxic fandom and reaction to Star Wars: The Last Jedi. The paper is titled "Weaponizing the Haters, The Last Jedi, and the Strategic Politication of Pop Culture Through Social Media Manipulation." Gotta say, it's a pretty good title. Now, I have been over this article 3 different times. I've looked at a lot of the science in it, and man, I hope I never have to do this much research for a news video ever again, but I thought it was important because this is a big deal to a lot of people, and this article or paper is making waves. I should mention, however, I'm not a scientist or a journalist. That's not what we do here at the Den of Nerds. We are fans making content for other fans. So really with this news show, what you get is the fan perspective on the news that is out there. I should mention as well, I find a lot of truth in this report, but I also find a lot of crap in this report. I question a lot of the science, but we'll get into all of that in just a second. So let's jump right in, go through the contents of this article, talk about what it all means and what it suggests, and then I will end off with talking about my feelings about this situation and where we are at as a fandom. The article begins by making the case that Star Wars and Star Wars films of the past have always been rooted in political belief. And actually, that's true. That's something that I talk about with a lot of different fans. I've talked about it here on the channel a lot. The ideas put into the moral fabric of Star Wars have had a political lean, and that lean has been left for a long, long time. I mean, the original trilogy had a lot to do with Vietnam. The prequel trilogy had a lot to do with the Bush administration and what was going on in the world and how America was using its power. So there's always been a lot of politics in Star Wars. So yeah, I agree with the article there. However, this article itself sort of tries to weaponize that fact and juxtapose it against the current political climate and why people have a problem with the politics in The Last Jedi, and I think that's a huge leap, but we'll get into that later. Another thing that the article starts out talking about is how the film itself is being dragged into the political arena, that a lot of the hate out there online and a lot of the conflict between fans is not actually because of the film itself, but because of pre-existing political obsession and disagreement. And I totally agree with this. This is something I've talked about actually at length. The fact is, a lot of people hold up the progressive politics in The Last Jedi and say that it's either the worst thing in the world or it's a good thing, and the fact that people hate that means they're not a real fan. I think in both instances and on both sides, people are crazy. That's not true. The film is progressive, but not any more progressive than I think the state of modern filmmaking. I find it true that this movie is being dragged into the political arena, and so I agree with the article here. However, later on, they sort of talk about this in more depth, and I disagree with the points that they make about it later. Now, let's get into the science in this report, and this is where it really loses me, and I think you'll see why in a second here, but I want to read now directly from this paper, talking about what it did to select the sample size that was used for this research. Here we go, from the paper itself. Collection practice. No mass collection of tweets has been performed since only tweets engaging with Rian Johnson have been collected. Only information stated publicly on the studied Twitter accounts has been collected. All information revealed in this paper was immediately available and observable on public Twitter accounts during the study period collection. Only handles of subsequently deleted or suspended accounts are revealed in this paper. The collection data has been stored and protected on computing devices. Sentiment analysis and coding. To ascertain how the collected tweets were constituted, a manual sentiment analysis was performed. I want to repeat that. A manual sentiment analysis was performed, which is described below, as one of the main objectives was to study the political leanings of Star Wars fans engaging with Rian Johnson rather than say how frequently those fans tweet. A series of several tweets expressing the same sentiment from the same account was reduced to one. This reduced the number of tweets under analysis to 967 and simultaneously created the foundation for the account analysis to follow, since each user was now represented by one tweet. Now, there's a lot of jargon in there, but essentially the thing that kind of boggles my mind is that they used a sample size of 967 tweets. 967 tweets, and these were all tweets directed at Rian Johnson. That's the sample size for one of the biggest franchises of all time that had the craziest movie that this franchise has ever seen, the most controversial, the most talked about, the most picked apart, the most analyzed film in Star Wars history. And the sample size to make the inferences that this article makes is less than 1,000 of tweets sent to Rian Johnson. That's not enough, in my opinion. But it gets even worse from there because of the categorization that is done with these tweets. The tweets were put into 3 different categories by the author. They were either considered positive, negative, or neutral. Now, you should look into the article and read further down to really dig into how this selection process was made, but suffice it to say, it was all self-diagnosed. The person that did the study decided the metrics for making the categorization of these tweets and putting them into those 3 different categories. But even beyond that, the subcategories of the negative tweets was also made up by the author of the report. Here's what they say. He split them up into political leaning tweets, tweets by trolls, tweets by sock puppets, and tweets by bots. Okay, once again, all self-defined by the study and put into these categories, by criteria designed by the author. Now, let's talk about the findings of this study. Essentially, out of the 967 tweets, 206 of them were considered negative by the metrics of the study. That's 21.9%. Now, what this is suggesting, and what a lot of different news outlets and people on Twitter were running with, is that only 20% of the responses online to The Last Jedi are negative. They are trying to paint the picture that only about 22% of all the talk online is negative with regards to The Last Jedi. Once again, based upon 967 tweets at Rian Johnson. That just seems like bad science. Beyond that, they looked into these negative tweets and they categorized 101 of the remaining negative tweets to be from either politically motivated people, bots, or sock puppets, essentially suggesting that about half of that 22% when it comes to the negative fans didn't count. They're not real negativity. It's not actually based on the film. It's fake negativity because it comes from people that are politically motivated, or it comes from bots, or it comes from trolls. Now, the weird thing that the study does is it calls back to the original statements made in the intro and the acknowledgement talking about how Star Wars has always been left-leaning politically. They use that fact to justify considering criticism of The Last Jedi that is right-leaning politically as not really actual criticism of the film, because it doesn't fall in line with the politics that Star Wars has always had. Therefore, it's an outlier, it's cognitive dissonance, that's not actual criticism. I mean, take all of that for, the way you see it. I see it as just crazy. That's crazy talk. There's a difference in the way that politics is addressed. Currently, there's a different political climate that we have on social media, and there's a difference in the way that The Last Jedi presents its politics compared to the old films. Once again, personally, I find it completely acceptable. It's not that big of a deal, but it is different. So what does all this mean? What do I think this actually means, and what do I think is going on with this study? Well, here we go. Let me just break into this. Yes, Star Wars has always been politically driven. I agree with that. But this is something that actually Jeremy Jahns nails on the head in his video, which was very popular, criticizing Disney Star Wars. And the idea here is that Jeremy puts forward in this video that the idea of preaching politics through storytelling is not a new idea, but the way it should be approached to reach the most number of people and to not be divisive is to sort of disguise the political leanings of the lessons and the morality underneath the massively acceptable, wide appealed narrative within the film. What this means is that you should present this story with its moral lessons hidden in a world of fantasy so that people that wouldn't normally hear out an argument of, let's say, progressive politics could accept it and digest it because it's coming through in the medium of high fantasy. This is the real tool of story. If you didn't do that, it would feel preachy and political. And what Jeremy Jahns talks about in his video, and I completely agree with, is the fact that Disney has to look at itself and say, who are you preaching to exactly? Are you just in an echo chamber trying to talk to people that already believe the same things that you believe? Or are you trying to put out this moral lesson in a way that massive amounts of people across the political spectrum can enjoy it and understand it? Because that is ultimately the difference between the way the old Star Wars films approached political things and the way the new Star Wars films are approaching these political things. So that's where I stand on the politics. I agree that it's being dragged, Star Wars is sort of being dragged into this fight, and it's really, like, honestly, the social justice politics in Star Wars are so small. It's such a small part of the film. I can't believe it is so focused on as a criticism and as a shining good thing about the film. I think it's kind of ridiculous. However, the reason that this is talked about so much, the reason that this is put out there so much online is because due to social media algorithms and the practices of media, whether it's big media or small media, it's just the popular thing to do to trigger people, to get attention, and to put stuff out there that people want to click on. So a lot of people out there in media are doing this specifically and politicizing Star Wars specifically because they know it will get the most clicks. It'll get the most attention. Similarly, on social media, you're fed stuff that will trigger you, that falls in line with your beliefs, and it's really a big echo chamber created through these algorithms because they want to keep you engaged on the platforms. And so when it comes to why this is so politicized and why it's being dragged into the realm of politics unfairly, in my opinion, has a lot to do with the practices of media and the algorithms on these social media platforms. But finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the influence of Russia and Russian bots or foreign powers when it comes to discourse online. Believe it or not, even though this article does a very shitty job of explaining why this is a problem and the evidence for it, I do believe it is happening. There are studies out there that are way better science than this report that do actually make the case that a lot of the discourse that is happening online between Americans is influenced by foreign powers to actually further divide us, to draw these lines, and to make things more hair-triggery, because that is ultimately the goal of the Russian Federation and a lot of enemies of this democracy, is to divide us. And so I do believe there is a portion of that happening. There's probably a portion of that happening when it comes to Star Wars, but this paper does not do its point any justice, in my opinion. It's not good science. It's clearly politically motivated. It is clickbait. This report is the exact example of why this is happening to Star Wars, because people don't give a damn about the integrity of the brand, of what this is doing to the fan base. They care about attention and clicks. And so that's what I think is going on. That's where I'm at with this story. That's what I think about the science that's in it. And honestly, I don't want to get too preachy or ranty. I'm sick of talking about this stuff, to be completely honest with you. It keeps popping up in the news. I feel a responsibility to talk about it and try to be level-headed about it, to give at least some people, the people that will ingest this content, a better framework to look at these problems and to investigate what's actually happening with Star Wars. And so that is going to do it for the Tuesday show. Holy crap, that was a doozy of a news report. I want to know what everybody thinks about this. As I always say, I really hope that we can have some actual discourse down there. I know people get triggery. I know tensions are high, but you should be able to put your point forward without like trying to throw mud. And if you were nice about things, we could all hear each other out and have a better conversation. Always a fruitless effort on my part to get that to go down, but either way, let me know what you're thinking in the comment section below. That's gonna do it for the Tuesday show. I wonder how many subscribers we lost because of this one. If you're still here and hanging out to the end of the video, thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. As I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video. You said, and do this